For decades, Britain was a symbol of economic power until something broke. In 2008, the UK suffered its steepest downturn since World War II, forcing a £137 billion bank bailout as the economy shrank over 6%. Yet what happened next is even more shocking. Living standards never recovered. Real wages remained stuck below their 2008 peak, and by 2030, the average British family will be £1,400 poorer, while countries like Germany surged ahead. How did one of history's wealthiest nations become poorer every year? And could the worst still be coming? Trading screens flickered red as the City of London braced for impact. In the space of a single week in September 2008, the financial system's arteries seized up. The LIBOR-OIS spread, a measure of trust between banks, leapt from 15 to over 100 basis points almost overnight. By September 18th, interbank lending had all but vanished. Repo market volumes collapsed, with overnight trades drying up as regular participants simply withdrew. For many traders, the silence on the lines was as alarming as the numbers on their screens. A senior dealer at a major UK bank recalled years later, the moment he realized, "No one is answering, there's no price." Within days, corporate lending ground to a halt. Companies accustomed to rolling over short-term loans found the taps suddenly turned off. The Bank of England's minutes from the period describe a widespread withdrawal of credit lines by major UK banks, not a trickle, but a flood. Syndicated corporate loans fell from £8.3 billion a week in early September to almost zero by the start of October. For manufacturers, the impact was swift and brutal. By the end of 2008, output across the sector had dropped 7%, a collapse not seen in generations. On the trading floors, the sense of routine vanished. One morning, a junior trader watched as his desk manager, usually unshakable, stared at a screen full of plunging bank stocks and muttered, "This is bigger than 9/11." The shock wasn't just about numbers. It was about the sudden realization that the entire system, so confident, so global, could unravel in days. Britain's economy, so reliant on its vast financial sector, was uniquely exposed. The freeze was faster and deeper than in Germany or Norway, where local banks leaned more on deposits and state buffers. Here, the city's appetite for short-term wholesale funding left it vulnerable to panic. By October, the need for state intervention was no longer a question. It was the only option left to prevent total collapse. GDP was already shrinking, and the scale of the damage was only beginning to surface. The rescue that followed in October 2008 was vast in scale and ambition. The Treasury committed £137 billion to support the banks, a figure that dwarfed any peacetime intervention in British economic history. Most of this cash went directly into two names that had become household symbols of the crisis: Royal Bank of Scotland and Lloyds. The government took majority stakes, installing itself as the largest shareholder and, in effect, the silent owner of Britain's financial backbone. For a brief moment, the state held the keys to institutions that had once seemed untouchable. But the bailout came with conditions. Shareholders were diluted, executives lost bonuses, and lending targets were set. The state demanded a say in how these banks were run, and the rules on pay and dividends tightened. Yet, even as the immediate panic faded, the cost of intervention lingered. The National Audit Office later broke down the numbers: £137 billion in direct support, with guarantees and insurance schemes at their peak, covering over £1 trillion in bank liabilities. This rescue was not a one-off check. It was financed through government borrowing, swelling the national debt, and reshaping the Treasury's approach to spending for years to come. By 2012, public debt had climbed from 38% of GDP to over 83%. The fiscal space that might once have supported new investment or social programs was now constrained by the burden of servicing this debt. Every budget, every policy debate, carried the shadow of the bank rescue. The Treasury's grip on the country's finances tightened, setting the stage for a new era of restraint. The legacy of the bailout was not just a number on a balance sheet, but a set of limits that would define Britain's choices for a generation. On June 22, 2010, the Treasury unveiled an emergency budget that would redefine the decade. The numbers were stark. Central government grants to local authorities faced deep reductions, with the Institute for Fiscal Studies calculating an average fall of 26% in council spending power across England by the end of the decade. Some departments saw their budgets cut by up to 86%. The plan was to shrink public borrowing by squeezing current and capital spending, not through broad tax increases. This meant public services, councils, police, libraries, youth centers, social care would bear the brunt. The Treasury's own statements confirmed the scale. Over £80 billion in spending reductions and tax rises were slated for the coming years, with nearly two-thirds of the squeeze falling on departmental budgets. Councils in the North and Midlands, already reliant on central grants, faced the largest proportional cuts. In places like Blackpool, Newcastle, and Birmingham, core funding dropped by more than a third. By contrast, more affluent southern councils able to raise revenue through higher property values saw much smaller reductions. Institute for Fiscal Studies analysis showed that by 2020, about 60% of government funding for local services had disappeared compared to 2010. More than 220,000 local authority jobs were lost between 2010 and 2018, a direct result of the fiscal squeeze. The numbers left little doubt the country's approach to public spending had fundamentally changed. The effects would ripple through communities, shaping the geography of decline and recovery for years to come. In Newcastle, the council leader sits at a battered desk, shuffling through a stack of letters from residents desperate for help. The phone rings with another complaint about missed rubbish collections. Outside, the city library, once a hub for school children and pensioners, stands shuttered, its doors locked since 2016. Over 220,000 local authority jobs have vanished across Britain since 2010, and the effects are everywhere. In Blackpool, food banks fill the gap, left by closed youth centers and cut-back social care. Elderly residents wait weeks for home visits that used to be routine. In Birmingham, parents walk past boarded-up Sure Start centers, explaining to their children why the playgroups are gone. Council budgets now stretch only to the legal minimum: emergency social work, basic road repairs, refuse collection when funds allow. Anything else, sports clubs, libraries, community events, has been stripped away. The council leader in Newcastle describes the new reality as managing decline. Decisions once about improving lives are now about which crisis to ignore. In wealthier southern districts, the picture is different. Higher property values mean more council tax, so libraries stay open and parks are mowed. But in the North and Midlands, the loss is visible and the anger is personal. Residents see their communities hollowed out, the fabric of daily life unraveling. Some turn to local charities, others to protest, and many to the ballot box, fueling a backlash that will soon reshape British politics. The divide between places that can still afford hope and those left only with memories grows wider every year. On the edge of an industrial estate in the Midlands, a family-run engineering firm faces a silent crisis. Before 2021, shipping parts to France or Germany meant an hour or two of paperwork, routine, manageable, just a cost of doing business. Now, every shipment to the EU requires 6, sometimes 8 hours of forms, declarations, and compliance checks. The owner, Mark, keeps a logbook on his desk. In January, 5 staff spent more than 120 hours on export documentation alone, triple what the business budgeted for the entire month. The orders themselves are shrinking. Invoices that once filled a folder now fit in a single envelope. By the end of 2022, EU customers accounted for less than half the volume they did before Brexit. Mark's records show a 47% drop in EU order volume over just 1 year. He scrolls through old emails, apologies for late deliveries, complaints about new fees, and more often, messages from long-standing clients saying they've found suppliers inside the EU. The numbers are stark but impersonal until they reach the shop floor. Overtime is gone. 2 machinists were let go last spring. Mark's wife, who handles the accounts, calculates that the lost EU business wiped out nearly £200,000 in revenue. The factory's machines still hum, but the rhythm has changed. What was once a steady flow of work has become a trickle, interrupted by the grind of compliance and the search for new markets. For small exporters like Mark, the cost of friction is not just measured in hours or pounds, but in the slow, grinding erosion of a business built over generations. Private bankers in Zurich and Geneva began fielding urgent calls from London almost as soon as the Brexit vote was counted. Within weeks, Swiss wealth managers reported a sharp uptick in new account applications from UK residents. Internal memos at major private banks noted a 35 to 50% increase in UK origin clients in the 6 months after June 2016, with some institutions stating that British assets accounted for nearly a fifth of their new European business. The trend wasn't limited to Switzerland. In Dubai, the International Financial Center logged a 40% year-on-year rise in UK resident account holders between 2018 and 2023. Trust companies in Jersey and Guernsey doubled the number of new offshore structures for British families, citing concerns about future tax policy and currency risk. By 2023, independent wealth consultancies estimated that Britain had lost a net 15,000 high net worth individuals since the Brexit referendum. The capital value of assets moved offshore exceeded £200 billion, based on average holdings per individual. Official statistics captured only part of the story. The Office for National Statistics recorded a £42 billion swing in unexplained outflows in 2019 alone, anomalies in the balance of payments that financial journalists and former Treasury officials quietly linked to capital flight. Private wealth advisors described clients seeking stability, not just tax advantages. Uncertainty over market access, the threat of wealth taxes, and the churn of political leadership all played a part. While Germany and Norway drew in new investment, Britain's most mobile fortunes quietly slipped away. The fiscal base eroded, leaving the government less able to respond to the shocks that would soon follow. Britain's public debt now hovers near 100% of GDP, a level not seen outside wartime in modern memory. The burden is not a relic of the 2008 crisis alone, but the sum of years spent borrowing to patch holes left by recession, bailouts, and faltering growth. As the Office for National Statistics tracks each quarter, the government's interest bill grows heavier, squeezing out space for new investment. In 2007, debt service cost less than £30 billion a year. By 2025, it absorbs over £110 billion, more than the combined budgets of policing and transport. Every pound spent on interest is a pound that cannot repair schools, upgrade railways, or fund the NHS. Yet the deeper problem lies in what Britain produces. Output per worker, productivity, has barely inched forward since the crash. Over the past 15 years, UK productivity has risen just 5%. In the 35 years before 2008, it doubled. The contrast is stark. In the United States and Germany, productivity has continued to climb, fueling wage growth and higher living standards. In Britain, the engine has stalled. Factories and offices have not kept pace with new technology or investment. The ONS Productivity Series shows that since 2008, each worker's contribution to the economy has grown by only a fraction of what it once did. This stagnation sets a hard ceiling on what the country can afford. With slow growth, the tax base struggles to keep up with rising costs. The government borrows more to fill the gap, but higher debt means tighter constraints on spending. The cycle reinforces itself. Weak productivity limits the resources available for public investment, while rising debt leaves less room to change course. Unlike Norway, which used oil revenues to build a sovereign wealth fund, or Germany, which invested in advanced manufacturing, Britain has relied on borrowing and short-term fixes. The result is a macroeconomic bind that leaves little room for bold recovery. The numbers are clear. The country's ability to improve living standards is hemmed in by the weight of its debt and the sluggishness of its output. The Smith family's story begins in a terraced house outside Manchester. In 2008, Paul Smith worked at a bank, while his wife, Sarah, managed shifts at a local supermarket. Their two children, Tom and Emily, shared a small upstairs bedroom. When the financial crisis hit, Paul's job vanished in a round of layoffs. Sarah's hours were cut. At first, they dipped into savings. Certain things would rebound. But the years ahead brought a different reality. Rent climbed steadily, outpacing their pay. The family postponed holidays, then birthdays, then even routine visits to the dentist. By 2012, the Smiths gave up hope of buying their own home. Each year, the cost of living crept higher: food, transport, council tax, while pay packets barely budged. The numbers tell a story echoed in millions of homes. Resolution Foundation projections show that by 2030, the average British family will be £1,400 poorer than they would have been if pre-crisis trends had continued. The culprit is not just stagnant wages. Since 2021, the government has frozen income tax thresholds, quietly pushing more earners into higher brackets as inflation rises. For the Smiths, this meant Sarah's modest pay increase was swallowed by tax. Disposable income shrank even as the official tax rate stayed the same. Housing costs became the Smiths' heaviest burden. Rent consumed nearly half their take-home pay. Moving wasn't an option. Everywhere else was just as expensive. The children grew up watching their parents juggle bills, skip meals, and weigh which repairs could wait another year. By 2023, Tom, now a young adult, left for a tech job in Germany, drawn by higher pay and lower living costs. Emily stayed behind, working shifts and saving what she could, but the future felt uncertain. For families like the Smiths, the numbers are not just statistics. They are the slow erosion of hope, measured out in skipped meals, lost opportunities, and the quiet resignation that comes from knowing next year will likely be harder than the last. In 2023, Britain's public debt stood close to 100% of GDP, and real wages remained below their 2008 peak. Over 15 years, local authority budgets in northern towns fell by more than 30%, while average families face projections of being £1,400 poorer by 2030. Documents show that after the £137 billion bank bailout, austerity led to over 220,000 public sector job losses, and Brexit tripled export paperwork hours for small firms. Meanwhile, private banking records confirm a sharp rise in overseas account openings since 2016. Still, key government files on policy decisions and long-term forecasts remain restricted. Unlike the US, Germany, or Norway, Britain struggled to revive productivity and safeguard living standards. The evidence reveals a clear pattern. Crisis responses often prioritized short-term stability over future resilience. Today, the question endures, grounded in official statistics and public records, whether Britain can halt or reverse this decline before the costs become irreversible.